Hi, my name is Stuart Sullivan. I'm owner and operator of Wire Recording Studio in Austin, Texas. It's a vintage analog digital large format recording studio. I have a 2,000 square foot tracking room that doubles as a soundstage for Mosaic Livewire video productions. I'm here today to talk to you about music production and bringing your songs to life. Obviously, I have to start with the song. I believe that when you're working on a song, the best thing you can do is listen to it as much as possible in as many different ways. So first you should be demoing your song, whether you have one microphone or a jam box in a room with a band, whether you have a nice studio, or whether you have some sort of an hybrid thing, little Pro Tools on your studio or on your computer. Demo and listen. Demo again and listen. And then start all over again and do it completely different. And demo and listen. And do that a handful of times, 2-3 times. Because what I'm trying to get is for you to look at a lot of different possibilities. You've already kind of worked on this. You have an intent. You have a song with a story and a mood. So you're already trying to impose that on air. But sometimes just listening to things that happen in an objective way allows you to make changes that really bring out things you hadn't heard before or weren't aware of in your song. So demo, listen. So when starting with the song, the first thing I'm going to say is that we need to look at the structure of the song. And I'll bring this up a couple of times, but most songs are recorded or are created and refined in a live setting. The demands of a live setting are a lot different than demands of a recording studio. Live setting, it's loud, there's alcohol, there's girls, there's boys, there's just lots of things to create an environment and an experience for you that doesn't happen in the studio. And somehow you've got to create something like that without all those exterior influences. So structure for me is the first place to go, because if you're playing a song live, you might have 3 intros, 2 verses, 3 choruses, another 2 intros, a verse, a chorus, but some kind of circuitous, long-running version of the song. And that's rarely the most effective or brings the most impact to the song. Most of the time, that much extra stuff detracts from the theme and the feel of the song. So you want to go through, and if you have 3 intros, you know what? Pick out your favorite one and keep it. Get rid of the other 2. If your song already is intro, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus out, it might be effective. But if your song is structured in a way that it goes verse, you might want to rethink that. You've got situations where I've literally seen where it's just been 5 or 6, 7 verses in a row with nothing else. And these tend to be kind of flat. They don't allow you to really have the dynamics or use dynamics that songs really benefit from. So the ability to cut down your song, to not have 3 guitar solos in the middle, and to not have 7 guitar solos on the outro, that sort of stuff makes a massive difference in the interest and the ability to be compelled by this song. So I encourage you to be very, very brutal with yourself and only, just the facts, sir, only use what's really needed in there and try to limit things, because if you've got 45 minutes or 45 seconds or 45 minutes before you even get to a verse, you've lost most of your people. And there are always a space for any arrangement and any feeling. But if we're talking about having songs that tend to be popular, put on the radio, perhaps win large awards, you tend to need to stay in a pretty focused and clear path. So the structure will do that. One other side thing about structure is it tends to cut the length of your song down, because live songs could be 6 minutes and no one thinks twice about that. But in a studio, a 6-minute song is like oh, cut my leg off. I got to get out of this trap. So by being able to be honest with your structure, you can trim down your length. And already the song has taken a huge leap forward in being acceptable and easy to swallow and enjoyable. The next thing you want to get is the tempo. And you may have worked on that on your demo if you did that. And that's great. But I encourage you, when you're playing with songs, to be adventurous on the tempos. You may have a song that works at 120. Sounds really good. It's a good tempo. Try it at 90. It'll be very difficult to play. Everyone will complain. It'll be very difficult. But honestly try. Do your best to make it work. Because if you do, every now and then you will find something that is magical and wonderful. You might want to actually change the tempo of the song, or more, you just maybe say, hey, on this bridge, let's go to halftime, because when we were playing it at 90, it had a great feel that it doesn't have at 120. So, there's ways that playful experimentation are your friend. I mean, this isn't brain surgery. If you miss, no one walks with a limp the rest of their life. They just change the part and nobody knows any better. So, structure, tempo, very essential beginnings of any song. One thing I should probably mention is that any song is really just a story and a mood. And everything you're doing is enhancing that story and enhancing that mood. It's not a math problem. I mean, people say that music is math, and I say, are you kidding me? I mean, music can be explained with math, but math is not music, not at all. Emotion, feeling, moods, that's what music is all about. So once you've built it up to there, now we look at basically the instrumental version of structure arrangements. Arrangements are the elements, the parts, the instruments, and the parts they're playing, what register and frequencies they're playing, what kind of rhythms they're playing. Because you have a tendency, once again, if you're in a live situation, to be able to have, fast tempos and busy parts. Everyone feels that if they're on stage and they have an instrument, they need to be playing, and probably a lot. And that's something that really interferes with song structure enormously, because how many times have I heard, well, that's not what I played live? I go, damn straight it's not. Understand that an arrangement really makes a song. And by arrangements, I'm talking about, we'll keep it simple with bass, drums, keyboards, and guitar, and background vocal. Well, if you've got the keyboard and the guitar playing basically the same register with the same sort of rhythm as the drum has, and maybe even the bass is just an octave lower but doing that, what you've done is created these really dense sections of your mix that are almost impossible to clear out because they are the home of each element. If your guitar is there and your keyboard is there and your bass is there and your drums are doing the same rhythm, then there's really no way to get out of that mess. So that's why you have to be thinking ahead of time about clearing out parts, simplifying your parts. If there's 5 words I can say this time, one of them is going to be simplify, because opening up room. The key thing that I love about songs is when there's room to breathe. So many songs, even, like nice songs, have no room. And I love it when something can go, wah, 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 pow, just any of those sorts of things, because they create a wonderful dynamic. And being able to give up what you've played live for X number of years and experiment with something new because maybe it works better is extremely important. So arrangement to me is great. You've got a guitar part here and it's doing a little melody, and the next thing you know, the keyboard's got a little like fifth above, a little melody, following it over there. And then 3 things like background cymbal comes into the chorus and splashes and opens up, and suddenly there's 3 guitars playing, but one of them is playing in the mid-range, one of them is a baritone guitar, and hell, one of them is a high-string guitar maybe, just to kind of like structure or just to, just create come on, you know what I'm talking about. So I really, really feel that as important as structure is in the song, arrangement becomes every bit as important, because you have a frame, you have a window frame that you're listening in. And the more stuff you cram in there, the more stuff you can't hear. So if you can simplify, open things up, make space, learn to play off each other so you have like two guitar parts that aren't going dunk, 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 but are dunk, 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 dunk. Any of these simple things can be incredibly effective in making the song more interesting, more compelling, and moving at a more consistent tempo or a consistent pace, because you really don't want to bore your listener. That's a big deal. So you're looking for things that are interesting and compelling to keep them captivated with your song, because your song is great. You just have to make sure they see it. And these tricks are what I'm talking about, to make sure that they recognize, as well as you, that your song is great. The next thing I want to talk about is execution, because I talked about slop versus tightness, and execution is where a lot of this gets played out. What we're talking about is if the drummer is playing to a click track but doesn't play well, you might like that track, but you might like that track, but to make it work, you're going to have to go in there and edit the drums. Maybe do a beat detective, maybe do it by hand, but one way or the other, you're going to have to make those drums really tight with the click track. And once you've done that and you play it back, everyone's going to freak out because they're all out of time. I was in time. Well, yeah, you were in time with the drums, but the drums were out of time. So now the drums are in time, you're out of time. So this is a thing you face all the time. You have to have this conversation with bands a lot. But to really make your song more of a consistent thing, which again is what the market tends to want, especially when we have a market that is based on loops and hip hop and these sorts of things. You really have to deal with what's happened as a result of that, that click track, obsession. And so here we go. We edit the drums, and then we edit the bass, and then we edit the vocal. And when we edit the vocal, we're probably tuning a lot. It's just a reality, A lot of people sing well, but not great. And what happens is when they slur, when they're going through a note, a passing note or whatever, they kind of miss, and then you don't get the melody anymore. The melody is obscured, and melodies are crucial. These are, key parts of what we're doing. So you want to make sure that you get your melody right, and that often is a result of having to tune a lead vocal. When it comes to background vocals, I might be a jerk for saying this, but tune the hell out of all of them. Background vocals can be wonderful, but they can be awful when they're out of tune. And what happens is they're generally singing along with the lead vocal. So if they're out of tune and singing with the lead vocal, even if the lead vocal's in tune, they're pulling away from its solidness. So I'm a huge fan of making background vocals good, real good. Even if it's artificial, make them good. So now we've talked about the execution of timing for lots of instruments and the execution of melody for mostly singing instruments. It's not completely unusual to tune a bass. Happens all the time. A little less likely. Tuning a keyboard, you've got a problem. Your keyboard should be in tune. But I am not afraid to go after almost anything if it needs tuning, because what we're looking at is we have a song. And whatever my head thinks doesn't matter for squat. I close my eyes, I listen, that's what matters. What I'm thinking doesn't matter, only what I'm hearing matters. And so if it hurts my feelings to tune something or to edit something, I'm going to get butthurt. It's just the way it is. It's essential to make a great song. Now, there are songs, and great songs, that have been made without any of this. About 20 odd years ago, before Pro Tools took over the earth, I made a record that was wildly popular and had one of the worst tuning variations I'd ever heard in any song ever. The band liked to drink, and we kept thinking, earlier in the morning. Well, at 9 o'clock when they show up with Bloody Marys, you're just going to go with what you got. And I was proven wrong. That song was a very popular radio song. It's called Wrong Way by Sublime. And it had crazy tempo variations. But again, with the advent of Pro Tools and the use of, and hip-hop becoming the dominant musical style, those fluctuations are less accepted than ever. So when it comes to execution, don't go crazy. Use the slop versus precision concept, but make sure you get the drums right. Make sure you get the vocals right. Those are the most fundamental elements you got to get right. All right. Now we're going to move on to mixing. And this is kind of obviously a magical element or a nightmarish element, depending on how you go. First question I'm going to ask you, are you mixing in the box per se? Can you recall what you are doing, or is it like I might do sometimes on this console, have everything spread out, and even if I have automation, I have to document every single knob and every single outboard piece of gear that I'm using, and it makes recall limited. It can be done, but there's a limit to it. If you're working completely in the computer or have some sort of a interface where it's just outputs, you don't have any levels, you can do completely recallable mixing. And that to me is pretty standard nowadays. I just finished yesterday, 2 days ago, I just finished a project, and there were 19 songs, and the last one we did had 21 remixes. I tend to think that might be a really bad case of OCD, run amok, but nonetheless, 21 remixes. And we got them all because, we would come up, we would send them the songs, they would listen to it, tell us things, we'd go back and change it, and we'd go through this process over and over and over. And it is a standard process, not something that you should ignore by any means. And what's wonderful about it is it gives you two other freedoms. One is that you can listen to the song and go back later and make a change. You don't have to decide right now this is the final one forever and ever. We can't get back. That's really a nice, comforting sense of freedom. And I think the other one that I find to be really wonderful is that when I'm mixing, I'm referencing a lot. I want to listen to other things to make sure that I'm in the ballpark with that song or this song, or even the other songs within the mix, within the project. And that's where it gets big, because if you have a completely recallable mix, I find a wonderful, wonderful way to kind of fine-tune these things and to listen into levels that you may not hear otherwise, is to pull up a song, listen to it, make a few adjustments, put it away, pull up another one, same thing. And in 10 minutes, you can pull up 5 songs and make 5 adjustments. And that gives you a very good overall overview of the project and how each individual song sounds. So if one gets too far off in left field, you can adjust it. So that referencing, whether it's to a your favorite record or whatever, or whether it is to other things you are in the middle of mixing, is extremely important. I find I oftentimes get, my head deeply up. I get confused. And having that freedom to be able to switch back and forth and listen to a lot of different stuff really kind of centers me and allows me to know where I want to go. Because once you're working, there's oftentimes a lot of insecurity or confusion, or I know what I like, but I'm working for a person that's in California or in Italy, and I'm not always sure what they like, and they're not there to tell me. So having this complete recallability on so many levels, to me, is fantastic, and it's expected on a professional level. It's an expectation that can't be ignored. So really think that is a big, big issue for us all. Let's see. All right. Now to some of the techniques of mixing besides what I just said. I like to start with drums. Loops, drums, a rhythmic foundation. I like to do that to kind of get my head around it. And I don't want to spend too much time, as little as I can. Hopefully I've recorded it the way I wanted it, so I don't have to spend a lot of time. But there's going to be some things. I might use parallel compression. I have a lovely Neve compressor that I really like, and I use it as a parallel compressor for any of my percussive instruments. By parallel compression, if you're not aware, it's just I have a bunch of faders coming up, and I have subgroups, and I can assign the drums to certain subgroups. That subgroup goes out to a compressor. I bring it back into the board. So now I have over here all the individual drum tracks uncompressed, and over here I have the whole drum mix compressed. So you get that compression, but you also still have life and breath without having to compress the hell out of every individual track. So I find that, going with my drums and my bass, and then very quickly getting a lead vocal in there is fundamental to me. Part of that is because I don't ever want to lose the lead vocal. And if I start right away, I put my drums and bass up there, and then I put the lead vocal. And if the lead vocal is kind of obscured, it has a veil over it, well, maybe I did something inappropriate with the drums or with the guitar. Maybe I need to go into my stereo submix and turn down 5K or turn down 3K so the vocal can stand out a little bit more. Because I find that environment really, really allows me to never forget where the vocal sits and where it's going to be. So as quick as I can, quick like a bunny, as they say, I try to get my drums and my bass and some scratch vocal going. And then I'll pull all the faders down and I'll start over again. And I will bring up everything, all the instruments. And I quickly listen to get panning going on various instruments. You're listening for any rhythmic things like a bongo or a shaker that kind of are complementary to each other or in contrast to each other. But you might want to pan those to the left and right somewhere. If you have a hi-hat going on here, you might put a tambourine or a shaker here that's a similar tone. But you get some of your pannings going. You get your guitars, your strings, your keyboards, your B3s, whatever other instruments you have in there. You start getting those panned and figured out. And now, in probably a half hour from when you sat down with I'm going to bring up a kick drum, you've got a picture of what you're doing. You may not have, the final picture, but you have a picture. This is a great time to stop for a minute and review what the song is doing and what you want it to do and how you want it to be. So you don't get too deep in and screw yourself up. So again, after this process of drums, bass, vocal, start over, everything, panning, that's when you start finding the ability to do more fine-tuning, more effects. You can start to hear where maybe effects will go, because when you've got something that is really flat, when it's just total flat recording, it has a two-dimensional kind of demo flavor to it. And you can go through and you can have a simple song. And all you have to do is maybe put a little reverb on the drums or a little slapback, and maybe kind of a stereo slapback on the voice or something, a touch of reverb on a guitar or a keyboard, and suddenly the third dimension, front to back, comes in. And if you're looking at 2 dimensions, frequency and panning, you add another 50% by having the depth. And that's an incredibly important one. Now, it can be overused. It can make it washed out and hollow and empty sounding. But I find using a large effect for a grand thing is nice, but I tend to use smaller reverbs, and I use a lot of slapbacks, and I'll also use extremely short delays. Cooper Time Cube, 11 milliseconds on one side, 13 on the other, things like that, because you don't necessarily hear them as delay, but they kind of just take a bigger space in your mix. So having those time phase effects are awesome. You really want to be able to carefully use those. And to me, once I've got the big picture, those effects become more clear, and it's easier for me to kind of define and figure out where they're going and what they need to do. Okay. Excuse me while I look at my notes. Listen to this. Listen. Have I mentioned to listen a lot? Listen a lot. take breaks when you listen. For instance, once you've done this process that I just described of, bringing stuff up on, bringing it back in, getting your depth going, starting to get fine-tuning. Once you've done that, stop. Go take a pee. Get a Topo Chico. Walk outside for a few minutes. Then come back in. I find it really helpful to reset my brain on a pretty regular basis, especially when I'm doing more of this kind of creative process. I don't want to get too burrowed down. I want to be able to have freedom of thought and freedom of creativity. And the best way for me, and I find with a lot of people, is to take regular breaks. Short ones. Don't take long ones. You'll get out of the groove. But if you take a 5-minute break here or a 5-minute break there, it can be invaluable to what you're doing. And I strongly, strongly encourage it. That's also a good time to check your phone. All right. Now we start back. And this is the home stretch. We listen with headphones. If you have a pair that you like, plug in the headphones and listen through the song 2 or 3 times with headphones. You're going to see relationships differently. Certain tones might pop out that didn't pop out in your speakers. They may be a resonant spot that you want to grab. The exact panning that you did in the speakers might be a little bit weird, and you can refine it in the headphones. There's a lot of little refinements. I'm not a big fan of starting on headphones, but when you get to a pretty good spot, put your headphones on and try some refinements and detail things a little bit. Make sure that your bass feels just right. Make sure that everything is like kind of hidden in a way. Make sure that everything's not panned in the center and has some breadth and width to it. These are things that I really feel that once you get to a certain stage, you've got to find unique ways to kind of refine it, because the same techniques you were using to build it aren't always as valuable to you when you're refining something. They're kind of different techniques. So let's see. Now you go back to speakers and you start, this is where I start switching from big speakers to little speakers to mid-sized speakers. I have little Oratones, I have junky little Logitech speakers, I have NS10s, and I have a kind of custom set of Chris Polonis that I like a lot. All of them are valuable. Not all of them are very good, particularly the Logitech. They suck. But they're very valuable in showing me certain things. And the reality of it is that a lot of my music is going to be heard on a computer speaker, or on a phone. And if I'm not aware of what I'm doing to those registers, to those areas, then I'm screwing up. So listen to a lot of different things. Listening is so important. Next step after that, you want to check the basics. Do you have a stereo mix bus, a compressor? Do you have an EQ? Tweak that. Listen. Now that you've got most of what you want, you can fine-tune that 2-mix compression much better, because it's responding to what it's going to respond to as opposed to a misbalance of things. Make sure that your level going to tape or whatever you're recording to is solid. You don't want to have overloads. If you're bouncing back into Pro Tools or whatever it is, you don't want to have overloads. Just, it's simple. Be careful. Be conscious of these things, because you're trying to be creative. You're thinking musically. You're doing all this, but you've also got a side of technology that you have to kind of maintain, and not overloading, not randomly compressing the 2-mix too much, or EQing the overall mix too much. These are all, simple problems that should be avoided, and I find they're easily avoided by taking just taking a break, taking 5 minutes, going back. That's where perspective becomes so incredibly important. So that's pretty much my story right now. I wish I could take questions, because every time I'm stumped for a moment or taking a question, I'm used to taking questions, and that gives me a few minutes to think and stall. But I think I'm out of my story. You've got your time. I hope this has been informative, and I hope that you are able to learn something and apply it to your music and make your music better, because ultimately my job is to help make your music better in any way I can. And over the years, I've learned a variety of techniques. Nothing works for everything. Nobody's right all the time. We're all wrong most of the time, but we just work so hard that it becomes right. And that's something that is true. There are so many situations I've been in where we were idiots, or I was an idiot. But you get something in your head and you just go full bore towards it. And you can turn it into right. So sometimes in recordings, you can turn wrong into right, but it takes an absolute blind commitment. I think that's all I got to say for you today. I hope it's good. Have a good day.